I learned from my previous experience making offers on property that I shouldn't be embarrassed to make this offer. Everything is negotiable.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 45 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
Hello and welcome to episode 16. You know what I love? I love finding off-market deals. Now, what is an off-market deal? An off-market deal is a property that is not listed by a broker, and it's just you negotiating with the owner of that property. Would you agree with that, Ken?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. So Ken is my guest today, and Ken, right out of the gate, I would say he's a new investor as of about 3 years ago, and right out of the gate, he found an off-market deal that was just phenomenal. Not only that, but his second deal was an off-market deal that was equally phenomenal.
It was great. Both were great.
Both were great. So anyway, let me introduce him. I'm talking to Ken Jenkins. And full disclosure, Ken is one of my cousins by marriage, and he's a good guy. I'm also excited to be talking to Ken today because not only did he find these great deals, but Ken lives on the other side of the state. So we're going to be talking about the Detroit side of the state, not necessarily Detroit, but kind of the Plymouth Canton area. And Ken can talk more about that. But Ken, let's just jump right into it. Why don't you start from the beginning? Tell me where you were in your mindset when you decided to start investing in real estate.
Well, that's a great question, Brian. It really starts off, my background is that my father owned single-family homes when I was growing up. And I was effectively his free labor. He was his own landlord, and he owned in very bad areas of Detroit, which were continuing to decline. And when I was younger, I'm 42 now, but maybe around the time when I was 15 to 18, this period in Detroit, the neighborhoods were in a quick decline. So it was a bad experience for my father, and I was his free labor, so it wasn't necessarily a great learning experience for me. Sort of fast forward, my wife and I had purchased a condo, and we had decided that, in fact, we had made a mistake and we'd like to own a larger piece of property. With my background, I decided that I could rent out the condo. That did not cash flow very well either.
Where was this condo?
This condo was in Canton, in the suburbs of Detroit. The reason it didn't cash flow is because we purchased it as a single-family residence, and we decided that we would just transform it into a rental. So, basically, we broke all of the rules of a good investment. So that's the background. And we ended up.
But you had purchased it though to live in it, right?
Sure,
so we had purchased it as a residence,
right.
And then you thought, well, let's move into a house and just rent it out. But then it sounds like the numbers didn't work out.
Oh, yeah, that's correct. The numbers didn't work out, and of course, like most people, when you purchase your primary residence, you don't evaluate it for cash flow in the case that you need to rent it out. Well, at least that's how most people do it. And so as a result, we effectively overpaid for the property if you evaluate it from the standpoint of it being a rental property.
Sure.
Right. So we held that property for about 5 or 6 years, and we basically broke even if you count my labor as being absolutely free. And you shouldn't do that, right? Because that's not a good thing to do.
Right. Your time is worth money.
Absolutely. It sure is. So we sold that in about 2007, when my second child was born. And subsequently, I took an assignment out of the country.
For your job?
For my day job. So, of course, I have a day job. And upon my return, I was gone for about 2 years. Upon my return around 2009, that's sort of where the story starts to pick up. I was investigating purchasing condos in that same complex. In fact, between 2007 and 2009, during the downturn, those same condos were renting for the same amount of money as when we had owned it previously, but you could purchase them for about 30% of what we had initially purchased our condo. So we paid maybe $160,000 for our condo in 2001.
And what could you rent it out for?
And you could rent it out for about $1,100 a month then. And then it turned in 2009, you could purchase the same condo for around $35,000 and you could rent it out for around $1,100 a month.
Wow.
And of course it's a condo. So there are condo association fees in addition to the mortgage costs.
Wait. Let me get back. Let me dig into your numbers here. Cause you said the values had dropped by about 35%.
No, I apologize. They dropped to 35% of the initial purchase price. So, it's about those numbers are probably wrong. More like 20%.
Okay.
Right. So the best deal you could get was about $35,000 on those condos. Right.
And you had bought yours for how much?
160.
So it went from a 160 value to a $35,000 value?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's
this was that's
an 80% drop in value, right?
80% drop in value. So 20, right. You could purchase it for 20% roughly.
Okay.
Right. So anyway, and I started looking at it and I immediately said, this is fantastic. I've got the money. I've got great credit. I should go back in and purchase these things and just start scooping up as many as I can. And then I started looking at what does that actually mean to me? And I was reading. I began my education. I started reading books about investing in real estate. And as a matter of fact, during one of my business trips, I picked up Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Right. And that was
great book.
It is a great book. And it's the first time I'd heard of it, but I didn't understand really what the topic was. And the title on it, on the cover of the book that I saw was something like, Financial Lessons You Should Teach Your Children. And I thought, okay, this is great. I was away on business. I'll read it, at night in the hotel room, and great. And it really, was a fantastic read, right? It's a fantastic book. And so fast forward to, I started looking at purchasing real estate again, 2009. And I found that prices had gone down. So I was very encouraged. And I thought, I need to be more methodical about how I approach this. If I decide that I want to do this, one of the things that I really did not like about my experience, other than, of course, not making a lot of money or not even breaking even from cash flow perspective, is I didn't want to have my dad's experience of being a landlord for 7 or 8 people who complain to you every month. And I didn't, want to get these calls at 2 a.m. in the morning. So of course, logically, I needed a management company. So I began researching that. And actually, this is the interesting part of the story that led me to multifamily and apartment investing, because like many of your listeners, I'm sure, I lived in an apartment at one time and I had no idea who the actual owner was. I mean, I knew who the manager was, but I had no idea who the owner was. So I knew that it was possible for someone to make money and not know the tenants or not hear the tenants' complaints directly. So that was where I wanted to position myself. So I purchased some books on multifamily investing. I think maybe a Dave Lindahl book and a couple of others, how to make money in apartments. And I was reading them while my son was at soccer practice. And it just so happens that my son was on a team with his cousin, and his cousin's mom was there. And she said, "You should speak with my brother. This is what he does." And I said, "Oh, Brian, I know Brian. What do you mean this is what Brian does?" And I was immediately skeptical. During this conversation, thinking back, I can say I was assuming that you were a landlord for 4 or 5 houses or something of that nature at that time. So I told Julie, your sister, "Thank you. I have a different idea about what I want to do. I want to own apartment buildings. And I want to own a lot of apartment buildings. And I don't structure it in such a way that I can afford to pay management and staff to take care of them for me. And she just looked at me and like I was crazy. And she said, that's what he does. Give him a call. So at that point, probably within 3 or 4 days, I'd made my first call to you.
And I remember that call well.
Yeah. Right. And I was a little nervous calling you. You know, I hadn't reached out to a lot of people that were actively doing this. I mean, I made a list of people. The books say, okay, you know, find all your resources, put your team together, make sure you have an accountant, make sure you have a lawyer, make sure you know, have a mentor. But my mentors were a little sparse, I would say. I mean, there were guys who had rented out houses. And so you'd come across a lot of sort of negativity about expanding. You know, why would you want to have 20 tenants? That's crazy. Or why would you want to have 50 tenants?
There's
right?
a lot of people who own properties and manage them themselves. And they do tend to get a little burnout and bitter because they may not be renting to the best type of tenants. They're renting to tenants who are giving them a lot of headaches.
Absolutely. And I know that's not everyone, right? So let's be clear. However, in my circle, those were the people who I had exposure to, right? Who had followed that path and really followed the path into pitfalls. And so I was really, really happy to get a chance to meet you. You know, and so immediately I was still traveling a lot for work. And what I would do is I would work. And then at night I would go on LoopNet, which is basically realtor.com for commercial properties. And I would evaluate deals. And basically, I shouldn't say evaluate deals. I would look at properties that were listed for sale. And I would try to determine if there was a way I could structure a purchase price that would allow me a positive cash flow. And as you know, because I spoke with you about many of these deals or many of these properties, I looked at quite a few of them. And my experience with LoopNet was that the properties that were listed there were typically either listed there because they were very, very overpriced, or the seller was intransigent and just not willing to negotiate once someone found a reasonable problem. And so the opportunities there were fairly picked over. As a result, one of the tactics that I began doing is just direct marketing. I contacted brokers, but as far as they knew, I didn't have the means or anything.
You didn't have a track record.
Right, I had no
track record. They didn't take you seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right. And so I found the brokers were simply sending me listings that were already listed on LoopNet, which meant everyone was looking at them, which meant really no other investors thought they were a good deal, right? I mean, at least at the current purchase price or at the current asking price. So there were a couple of other marketing strategies that were outlined, but one that I found that I had some success with is really just direct marketing to owners. And
now, weren't you traveling? Like you specified a location first, right? Because it seems to me that when we were talking, you had kind of pinpointed some areas in Detroit, or kind of some C- D+ areas.
Yeah, so that's actually a great point. Well, I had started, like many people start, with an idea that I wanted to sort of stick my toe in the water, so to speak. And to me, that meant the least amount of financial risk for the capital that I was laying out. And I think the benefit of really our relationship and my discussions with you is that you convinced me, or you showed me the truth that, in fact, a property that was in a D area that was for sale for $175,000.
Right, and let's be clear about what a D area would be.
Right.
Because a lot of people, when you get into commercial and in larger apartments, you kind of grade the property itself and you grade the area itself. So an A area would be like downtown, you have high income people, well-kept lawns, pride of ownership, just really, really nice. A B area, still nice, but a little bit more middle class. C, you're still middle class, blue collar, but you start getting into some low income, and maybe there's a little more trash, a little bit more dilapidation, I guess. And then when you're in a D area, now you're talking in an area that you would not want to live in, and that would some people might refer to them as areas where the police might be very familiar with what's going on that street.
Right, absolutely.
D areas, I tend to stay away from those, but you can find good deals in D areas, and some people, that's their niche, is buying in some really bad areas, and
right.
They can make a lot of money. But that's kind of the direction you were heading at the time.
Well, it absolutely was, and because of the size of the purchase I was looking to make at that time, I had looked in a couple of D areas, and I was looking at a 12 unit that was, I think, $225,000 at the time. And it wasn't in a great area, and it had a lot of existing vacancy, and I was attempting to negotiate a land contract. And I was in the process of looking at that property, and you reviewed it with me. And you gave me your honest opinion. And your honest opinion was, if I remember at the time, that the asking for price was approximately $100,000 too high. And I thought at first maybe that was crazy. But now, and with a couple of years experience, you were absolutely right. The amount of additional capital we would have had to put in to bring the property up to a reasonable level, and then to get good tenants in there, there's a lot of cost associated with that. And there's a lot of headache associated with that as well. I mean, even if you can do it successfully, you want to do it successfully in an area where it would pay off from a financial perspective. You don't just want pride of ownership. You do want pride of ownership, but that's not the only thing you're going for.
And let me just say something there. I mean, if you buy in a D area and you improve the property, and you put who knows how much money you need to into that property to get it running the way it should, well, you're still going to be in a D area. So the tenants that you get are not going to be the best types of tenants.
Yeah.
You're going to have problems with a lot of your tenants. So it's much better to be. I like B and C areas. Those are the areas I like to invest in, and that's kind of what I pushed or recommended that you invest in.
And based on that discussion, I really started. I think I found that particular property through maybe a Craigslist ad. At that point, that was probably when I was making that offer. It was probably 2010. So there may have still been a fair number of good deals on the market in the Detroit area. As a matter of fact, let me back up. There were plenty of good deals in retrospect at that time.
Yeah, you could have just bought indiscriminately and you'd come out ahead.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Almost. And it's been an uphill battle to get good target properties over the past couple of years. Definitely the past 24 months has been extremely challenging. The last 18 months, I would say.
Well, you did at that point decide to change your outlook as to what type of property you were going for. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember saying to you, buy a better property in a better neighborhood and don't manage it yourself, because you were thinking of managing yourself.
Well, that's a good point, Brian. I was absolutely thinking about managing it myself, or at least partly. And I was still in the mindset that I could make the deal better by just, managing it myself, by cutting costs on maintenance, by cutting costs on management, by just doing it myself. And that was a little bit of my mindset right at that time. And it turns out that I made a more reasonable offer on that property, which was soundly rejected. As a matter of fact, the broker for the seller was actually offended And I think I was probably about doing my job at that point. If he was offended, I've since learned I've made a lot of offers.
Don't be afraid to offend the brokers.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have thick skin.
They do have pretty thick skin. And going forward after that was really the first apartment complex, or I would say, it's a very small complex, only 12 units. The first one that I made an offer to purchase, and it fell through. And subsequently I made about, in the next 8 to 10 months, I think I made 40 offers on 40 other complexes that were in the smaller. Oh yeah. Yeah. Wow. As a matter of fact, I made it a habit. I analyzed every single property that was put on LoopNet for about a 2-year period. So I've probably
from what size, duplex to 20 units, or what were you looking for?
Anything that was duplex, anything that was multifamily and above. Even just for the practice, $5-6 million deals. I was just trying to see. I felt like I could be much more confident if I had looked at everything. And really, it's free to sort of do your homework. So that's what I had done. And so over the course of time, I determined that, look, if I can understand what the correct purchase price is for this property, so that I know it's a winner for me, why won't I make an offer at this purchase price? Why would I not make the offer? And really, what ended up being the limiting factor is really more my capital situation than it was whether or not it was a good deal, because I really didn't have some of the confidence that I've currently got. So fast forward, I started based on your direction or guidance, we'll say. I started looking in a more finite area. I just got to the point where evaluating all these deals and making 40 offers and getting rejected, or they didn't all get rejected. I mean, there were negotiations back and forth on many of them, but not getting to the closing table was getting a little old. And I had found that in order to sufficiently research and make a good offer, I was spending a lot of time on different areas of the city. There was a property in Birmingham, a 10-unit in Birmingham, Michigan, which is an A area. It's quite a nice area. And in order to make the offer on that property, I had to do a significant amount of research, and it took me a significant amount of time.
Were you driving the property as well? I mean, is that part of the...
Typically, before I made an offer, I drove the property. The first analysis, I would never drive the property. I mean, I was analyzing everything, so that just wasn't possible. By the time I got to making an offer, of course, I won't make an offer without understanding all the comps, all the comparable rents, comparable sale prices within a 1 mile area. And that's
you were doing some pretty exhaustive research before you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would look up the tax records. I'd try to understand the financial situation of the person who was selling the property. I was trying to find any way I could to really make sure I was going to make a good financial decision for myself. And that just got a little bit exhausting. And so I decided, I think with your guidance, to look at a very specific area. And that's when I've lived in the Plymouth Canton area, Plymouth Canton, Northville, for almost 20 years now. And I decided this is a good area. It's very close to home, which is good for me, because even if I have someone else who's managing it, I can at least check on the properties. And I started basically a letter writing campaign, direct marketing to owners. And I drove. Plymouth is a nice area. For your listeners who don't know, it's one of the few suburbs of Detroit that has an actual downtown.
It's got the walkable downtown community that a lot of people, especially younger people, like to live in. Right,
absolutely. And it suffered less from the real estate recession, I'll say. It did suffer, but not nearly as bad as some of the other areas of Detroit, the suburbs of Detroit. So I started that marketing campaign, and I was surprised with personal direct letters at the response that I received. I was receiving 30% feedback rate from these letters.
Wow.
People were not just throwing them away.
So let me stop you there. I seem to remember you actually driving the neighborhoods first and pinpointing the properties that you wanted to send letters on. Is that kind of how you decided where to send letters to?
That's exactly what I did. Yeah. Because I'd lived in downtown Plymouth.
You knew the area. So
I knew the area
where
very
are the
well.
properties in that area.
Yeah.
Then you found out who owned them. Did you go to go online to find the tax data? Is that how you got the addresses?
So I've got a fantastic dabaase of Plymouth real estate market
that you've designed yourself. Huh?
That I've designed myself. So given my knowledge of the area, I was also able to use Google Earth and there's just a lot of additional tools available now that help people to gather this information. And so I had to compile information from the tax website, from the state. A lot of people, of course, hold their properties in LLCs. So you have to, there's an additional step to gather the mailing address for those. And so as a result, though, I was able to send out letters to, I believe, every multifamily owner inside of the city of Plymouth for sure. And I think most of them out in Plymouth Township and Northville.
So how many? That must have been hundreds.
Yeah, it was hundreds.
And you were getting a 30% response rate.
Yeah, I got about a 30% response rate. So I think in the end, the last time I looked, it was 265 or 270. When I say hundreds, I don't mean.
So that's a lot of conversations to have then.
Yeah. That wasn't 260 conversations. There were about 260 properties.
Okay.
And so as a result, I had about 60 conversations. And sometimes the conversations were very simple. The feedback being, don't ever call me again. Don't ever contact me. And sometimes, it was, let's meet for coffee. It's pretty easy to tell someone you'd like to purchase their property, and you're not a broker. And that's, you've seen my letter. That's exactly what it says.
Right. I'm not a broker. And you're not going to pay any broker fees.
Right.
Because a lot of people, especially older people who have owned their properties for a long time, for some reason, they don't want to deal with a broker. They see it paying 6% or whatever the percentage might be as an extra fee that they shouldn't have to pay. So when you approach them off market and say, well, there'll be no broker fees, sometimes they're a lot more interested in what you have to say.
Absolutely. And sometimes a lot of those guys, they're hands-on. So they're not comfortable to start off with handing off part of their operation to someone else. So you're dealing with basically if you're looking at a small apartment complex, you're dealing with a guy who used a significant amount of his personal income and he bought a property and he is the handyman. He is doing the leasing. That's his.
He's taking the calls from the tenant.
He's taking the calls from the tenant. And he's also the one who might be tired of doing that. But his skill set doesn't necessarily include getting someone else to take care of it for him. And he's not comfortable with that relationship. So he won't hire a management company. Right. He would much rather dispose of the property than hire a management company.
Sure.
Because he doesn't want the headache.
So you found someone like that. Let's talk about the property that you found, or
Absolutely.
The properties that you found.
There were, right. So I received a call back for one of the letters that I sent, and there was a gentleman who said, I've got your letter. I'm interested in speaking with you about selling my 8-unit. And I said, that is fantastic. I'd love to talk with you. Can you give me the street address? And he gave me the street address, and it was very close. I knew the area quite well. And he gave me the rent roll, which I could immediately identify because I was very familiar with the area, that it was 20% below market. The current rents were 20% below market. And this area it was of course 100% occupied because it's a great place to live.
Great area.
Great
and
area.
Great price. People were getting a huge bargain, weren't they?
Yeah. And he said, the only thing is you also have to buy my duplex down that's in town there as well. But there are people living in it and I can't kick them out. So you'll have to purchase them both as a package deal. And that that was great from my perspective.
Yeah,
Right.
it was a bonus.
Right. So I was solving a problem for him. This particular gentleman had also owned coin-operated car washes, and he had sold them off using a broker. And he had a horrible experience, an absolutely horrible experience. So he was not willing to deal with a broker. And his first conversation with me was just to ensure I wasn't actually a broker, and that I was going to actually be purchasing it.
Didn't you you met him for coffee and then you got in his car?
Oh, yeah.
There was some story about.
Okay. So we agreed to meet. So after the first phone call, it was decided that we would meet at the 8-unit property. And I immediately after the phone call, we were going to meet the next day. After the phone call, I immediately got in my car. I drove the property. I saw that it's a beautiful 8-unit brick building that was in excellent shape. It was obviously well maintained. And then I drove by the duplex, and it was a brick duplex in downtown Plymouth. And I thought, this is fantastic. I'm so excited to meet this guy. I had no idea what he would want out of the properties.
Yeah, at this point, you weren't even talking price.
Right, not even talking price. He's
Establishing
just
a relationship.
Absolutely. So I met him the next day. I remember 10 a.m. He pulled up he had a Cadillac, and his girlfriend was driving the Cadillac, and he was an older gentleman. And he had a surgery or something very recently. It turns out that the seller, he's just a fantastic guy, he had gotten in a fairly bad motorcycle accident. And as a result, this had happened maybe 3 months prior. As a result, his daughter was managing the properties for him, but she didn't want them because she lives she lives too far away to effectively manage them. And of course, as it turned out from discussions with him, he wasn't necessarily satisfied with the level of work she was doing.
Sure. He would not be satisfied with the level of work anybody would do, I'm sure.
Absolutely, right. And so there are a lot of, family social dynamics that go into the decision to sell and not just hand it off to your children. And that was at play here. And it's not right or wrong. I mean, I've seen enough of these situations to understand that it's human nature, right? And it was we were providing a valuable service for him because we were allowing him to, liquidate his holdings and maintain a good relationship with his daughter, right?
Yeah, you got to understand his situation.
Right.
And you came up with some solutions for him.
So we'll go back to our first meeting. So I sort of jumped ahead there, but he had his leg was in a cast, and he said, "Okay, I apologize, but we've forgotten the keys at my house. I don't have the keys for the 8-unit. I do have the keys for the duplex, but we'll have to go back to my house to get the keys." And so I immediately thought, okay, well, that's perfectly fine. This is a very interesting opportunity for me. I'll wait here. And he said, "Well, why don't you get in the car and come with us? And we'll drive to my house in Livonia, which is a suburb that's very nearby."
And then we'll kill you.
Right, exactly. Well, he was an older gentleman. He had about 25 years on me, as did his girlfriend. So I was fairly confident in his state that I wasn't really
could run fast enough.
I think so, but it was a little strange, I will admit. But at this point, I was really striving to build a personal relationship with this guy. So I hopped in the back seat of his car, and we drove to his house. I had to assist him into his house, get a wheelchair that he was using out, and lift him into the wheelchair so that he could roll himself in the house. And then his girlfriend drove me back to the properties to look through them. And he wasn't actually there while I was looking through the properties.
Oh, okay.
But I got to go to his house. I sat with him and I talked for a few minutes there. And so we went back to the properties, reviewed them. They were great. I mean, they were everything that I could hope for.
He was taking good care of them.
He was taking good care of them. And at that point, I had been through a lot of properties. Brian, because you've walked through a lot of apartments, when you go into people's apartments and they're occupied, You see people who keep apartments that are in extremely poor condition, up through the best. But the poorest condition really sticks out.
Yeah.
So you can
see some awful things.
Absolutely. So these apartments and the units in the duplexes were really in great shape, and the people were taking care of them. And that was obvious. And so that
you're talking about B property and probably B plus tenants.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a couple of other things that I learned up to this point on this particular property. One of those is that the owner had decided in 2007, he had suffered, his wife had passed away from cancer, and it was pretty bad. But in order to spend more time with her, he had decided that he would reduce everyone's rent and that he wouldn't raise their rents again.
To keep them in the unit.
To keep them in, so he didn't have to go do as much work. And so as a result, in 2007, everyone's rent was reduced by a significant amount.
Interesting.
Now, subsequently,
so he just actively reduced their rents.
He actively reduced their rent in a time when it might have been a little bit harder to find tenants as well.
True. Yeah, there was a drop-off in occupancy around that time.
And he had not raised their rents since then. Now, as people had moved out, there were one or two people who had moved out. Most people weren't moving, by the way.
Why would you?
Yeah. I mean, they were not going to move. There was no way. Because they were getting great deals.
What was utilities included? Who pays the utilities?
For the 8-unit, the utilities, the gas and water are paid by the landlord, and the tenants are responsible for the electricity.
Okay.
So that includes heat, right?
Gas heat is included. So that's a big, tenants love that.
Right. And in the duplex, the tenants were paying all of their own bills, and they were splitting the water bill on just a 50-50 basis.
Yeah, so he had dropped the rents. The tenants they loved living there because they were getting such a great deal. And you look at the situation. He's been taking great care of the property, 20% below market rents at least. I would say. Where did you take it from there?
I identified fairly quickly that it was a great deal. So I took a look at it and I said, I'm going, instead of basing, because I know all of this information about the seller, instead of basing the sale on what I believe a fair market price would be or how I could make money, I'd like to give this guy his money back for his purchases. I'd like to make him whole, 100% on everything he invested in terms of purchase price. Mm-hmm. And so I found out how much he paid for the properties. And
how long had he owned the properties?
One property he had owned for the duplex, I think he had owned for about 12 years, and the other property he had owned for almost 20.
Okay. Was he expecting to take a loss at that point?
I don't know what he was really expecting. Mm-hmm. I suspect that, in fact, he probably had some pending medical bills that he wanted to pay. Mm-hmm. And that the idea of getting a large sum of cash was going to be good for him because it would free up, not only his ability to not have to worry about the properties, but it would maybe potentially pay off some of his medical bills. That's what I think. I have no evidence.
Don't know that.
Yeah, I don't know.
So tell me how you decided on price.
Well,
or your offer, I guess I should say.
Right. Well, there were a number of offers that we went back and forth on. And he told me during our first meeting, he said, here's what I sort of expect. I expect that you're going to give me a number, and then I'm going to look at that number, and I'm going to give you a number back. And then you're going to look at that number, and then you're going to give me a number back. So, I mean, obviously I wanted to meet his expectations, right? So I think at that point I had... I'm trying to think back now about how I structured it, but I based on your guidance, I made 3 offers. I made 3 offers for the properties.
At the same time?
At the same time. I structured an option 1, an option 2, and an option 3 in order from the highest price to the lowest price, and the lowest price was typical bank financing. Mm-hmm. And the first 2 offers were offers which included seller financing on the properties.
Right. So if he would hold the note, you would pay a higher price.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And did he must have owned them free and clear then?
He did own them free and clear. Yes, that's true.
So that's always a great opportunity.
Right.
Because you can afford to pay more for a property if the terms can be more in your favor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so at that point, we had some negotiation back and forth. And I can't remember really, now that it's been a couple of years, what the initial offers were, but I do know where we ended and sort of the process that took us there. There were three offers. First was a seller financing offer at 3%.
3%. You'd pay him 3% interest.
3% interest with a 10-year balloon payment on a 30-year amortization. At a purchase price of, I think, $280,000 for the 8 unit. And then I offered, I think, $120 for the duplex as well under the same terms. Mm-hmm. And the second offer was the same sort of terms on the 8 unit, but a bank loan on the duplex at roughly 110. Okay, and then there was bank financing, and it was that offer was much lower, and
So, in other words, had you had to go to the bank to get financing on these properties, you would have paid a lot less for the properties.
That's correct. I would have paid less, and I structured it in such a way that I would have paid him less than he would have initially paid for the properties several years prior to this.
So you wanted that to be the least attractive offer.
I did. Yeah. I absolutely did. And of course, because I had run my numbers in the background, it was the least I mean, all of the offers were about the same from my perspective. I would have come out about the same because I was offering much less money. But I really didn't want him to take the third offer. So we had some back and forth. And actually, I remember this point, Brian, because I had called you during this negotiation, and I said, this is what I'm thinking of offering him. And I wanted to entice him to take or provide some seller financing to me. And I took what I had researched to be the going loan rate that I thought I could get from a bank, and I had increased that interest rate, and I tried to structure the deal that way, and it was less lucrative to me. And as a matter of fact, all of my offers were much higher before I had this conversation with you as a result of this. And so I had originally wanted to offer, I think, 6% interest to him in order to entice him to take seller financing. And I after a discussion with you, you said, that's crazy, offer 3. And
what are you thinking?
Well, right. And so I'll tell you, and for your listeners, I thought this was a crazy idea.
Who would take 3%?
I thought there's no way this would work, but I learned from my previous experience making offers on property that I shouldn't be embarrassed to make this offer. I should go ahead and this is a negotiating point. Everything is negotiable. And so I made that as part of my first offer. And he rejected that offer. It turns out that where we settled was 4%, which was better than I could have gotten at the bank at that time, with a 20% down payment on a $270,000 purchase price. And that was for the 8 unit. Mm-hmm. And then we purchased the 2 unit or the duplex with a traditional bank loan at $120,000, which is what he had initially paid for it.
So you got a residential loan.
So we got a standard residential loan. And so from his perspective, he was making a seller finance deal on one of the 2 properties he was trying to get rid of, but we were effectively coming in with $120,000 plus the 20% down, which is $54,000. We were bringing $174,000 of cash to the table at closing for him.
Right. So he saw that you had a lot more skin in the game, even though it wasn't necessarily your money on the
right. That's exactly right. So it did cost us $174,000 to bring $174,000 to him, mm-hmm. but that's how I presented it to him. And
it did or did not cost you $170,000?
Well, because we were getting a loan on the duplex, we did that with 75% loan to value. Mm-hmm. There, we obviously weren't $120,000 out of pocket for that purchase.
Right. Okay.
Right. Also, at this time, during my research, I had determined that the fair market value for the 8 unit, in my estimation, was about $330,000. So significantly higher than what I was.
So you paid $280.
I paid $270.
$270.
And I determined the fair market value was $330.
$330. Did you ever get an appraisal at that point, or did you just
I
go
didn't.
off your...
I did not get an appraisal because an appraisal was going to be a couple of $1,000s for a commercial property. And frankly, I was extremely confident that my numbers in this deal were going to work out. So, I mean, I did everything else but the appraisal. I
So you had about $60,000 in value, that equity that was right there at closing for you.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Absolutely. And that's in the 8 unit. So in the duplex, we had seen the market was changing right when we were making this purchase. And the duplex clearly was worth at least $145,000. I mean, it was obvious to me that it was worth $145,000. And we were purchasing at $120,000. So I thought that's okay. My plan, by the way, overall was not to hold the duplex because the management fees associated with holding a duplex didn't actually work out for what I was paying.
So you
and
would
what
not
the
have
rents
been
were.
cash flow positive on the duplex?
No, we would have been cash flow positive, but our before tax cash flow was going to be in the 2 to 3% range. And that, quite frankly, isn't acceptable. I mean, it's not negative, which is a good thing.
Right.
But like all of us, we have demands for our money. Right. Sure. I mean, we have an opportunity to either invest in the stock market or invest in real estate or invest in private businesses. There are demands on our money and there's opportunity cost. And it doesn't make sense to tie up your money definitely in something that's cash flow negative, unless you have an exit strategy that's going to change that for you overall.
Sure.
So I knew that we could exit this duplex and not get hurt. Let's put it that way.
And sure enough, you did exit.
Oh, absolutely.
Talk about that, and then we'll get back into the 8 unit.
Right. So we took over the properties, and that happened in, I think, February. And by about April, it was obvious to me that I might be able to sell this thing for even more than $145,000. Duplexes were starting to pop up around town where people were asking $200,000 for them. I thought, okay.
And by the way, this duplex was in a neighborhood. It was in a very nice neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
Where it was obvious that someone would probably buy it, tear it down, and build themselves a nice big house.
Absolutely. And so I, with that in mind, I listed it myself on Craigslist, not without a broker. And I just said, let me just float this out there and see
another off-market deal,
right? What I can get. And so I listed it I started out at $2.25, and I didn't get a lot of interest. I got some people who called me and were interested, but not anyone who was serious. And then I lowered the asking price to $199, and then I started to get some interest. And after some negotiations, I sold it at $178, approximately, I would say, 6 months after we purchased it at $120.
Wow.
And so that was
$58,000 spread there. That's nice.
That was fantastic. Now, one of the things about this particular property is it had a smaller lot than the adjacent parcels. And so it's not particularly well suited to be torn down and rebuilt on. Is
it still there?
It's still there.
Okay.
It's still there. As a matter of fact, the home next door, I sold for $178. The home next door, which was on an equally small lot, sold for $140 just after we sold. And I advised the young man who purchased, he was a young man out of Chicago who moved here for work, to purchase the lot next door or purchase the house next door, because at $140, it was a fantastic deal.
Too.
I mean, you could combine both of those lots and get them rezoned and build a duplex there potentially, and that would have been nice. But there, on the other side of this particular lot, while we were in the process of closing, someone purchased a slightly larger lot. It had about 10 feet more in one direction for $200,000. I shouldn't say purchased a lot. They purchased a 3-bedroom, bath and a half ranch home, brick home, for about $200,000. And then they completely tore it down. And then they started building a brand new mega house there. Sure. So that area was just fantastic and got extremely lucky in being able to purchase the way we did, at the price we did, and at the time we did, really.
Yeah. So you rode that elevator all the way up and got off at the top floor?
Well, I mean, maybe we didn't get off at the top floor, but, who can predict the top?
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So I'm satisfied with how it worked out. With the amount of money that we, put at risk, we had a 100% return within a year.
100% return on the money that you actually put out of pocket
for the duplex.
For the duplex, absolutely.
Sure. More than 100% return.
Yeah.
And so that was fantastic.
And it gave you the opportunity to take some money off the table,
right,
and deploy it into something else. And we're not going to talk about that yet. But let's get back to the 8 unit, because you still own that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And
I love that 8 unit.
How did it go? I mean, you bought it. What did you do?
Okay. Well, so I had found a management company that was local in town, and they immediately started helping me right from day one. From day one, what we went and did was we raised rents, and everyone was on a month to month at that time, so it was fairly easy for us to put everyone on leases and raise rents. Not a whole lot, but the rents were quite low, so we began incrementally moving them up.
How much did you push it in the beginning?
So the average rent for a 1-bedroom there was $540 when we took it over. And we immediately started with a $50 increase. And we did that in 2 ways. We allowed them to sign a lease at a $25 increase. And then we implemented a water fee, a $25
like
water
a rub
fee.
system, or just a
water,
just
a straight
rubs,
water
just
bill, water bill for these for each tenant. And so as a result, in month 2 after we owned it, the rents were, or maybe month 3 is when it actually kicked in. The rent was $400 higher per month than when I purchased it.
So that's about a $5,800 increase per year that you were able to add right away.
$4,800 per year right away.
$4,800. I'm sorry.
There was really no deferred maintenance here. I mean, it was a nice property, or it is a nice property still. And subsequently in Plymouth, this area has undergone just a dramatic increase in the rental rates with no more units coming on the market.
So it's a pretty built-out area already,
right.
So you can't really add many new apartments.
Sure. And 1-bedroom units that are renovated very well are renting for as much as $1,000 a unit right now.
Wow. Not
in my property, because we haven't made significant capital investment there.
Right. You keep them nice, but we
keep them nice, right? And I'd like to keep them nice, and I'd like to keep the rents high, but I don't want to be at the top of the market there.
Sure. So what are you up to now?
The average rent is $715 right now. We have some people who signed up for a 2-year lease, and those are coming due in the next 3 to 4 months.
So you've owned that for about 3 years? 3-4 years?
Yeah, this is the 4th year.
So in 4 years, you went from $540 a month to $715.
Right, and the current market rent in that area is $775 to $800, and so I anticipate in the next 12 months we'll have enough turn and enough lease renewals that we'll get very close to that. I anticipate we'll probably be in the $770 range, with a couple of tenants paying at $800 and a couple of our longer term tenants paying something lower in the $700 range.
Nice.
And I'm excited about that. I mean, obviously that adds a lot of value to the property. It's fairly efficient. The tenants in this area, the tenant base, I can't say enough about it. Plymouth is a fantastic place to own property. It's a fantastic place to live. This particular property is 2 blocks away from a brewery, restaurants, salon. You can walk to get groceries.
Walkable place.
Absolutely.
Neighborhood.
Absolutely.
Now, just so people know where Plymouth is, Plymouth is probably, about 20 minutes west of Detroit? 30 minutes west
I'd say
of Detroit?
It's probably halfway between Detroit and Ann Arbor. So,
Okay,
yeah.
just so people can kind of picture it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more of an outer ring suburb of the city of Detroit, is what I would say.
Right. So what else did you do when you took over the property? You raised rents. Did you have to put any money or any effort into the property?
We made some minor cosmetic improvements to the exterior. We replaced a fence that had was in need of replacing. We replaced some interior carpet and interior hallways. But generally speaking, like right at the beginning, we did nothing. It turned
Pretty
out
turnkey property.
it was a pretty turnkey property. It turned out that we did eventually need to replace the sewer line, which was less expensive than I had anticipated.
What'd that cost you?
Altogether, it was about $6,000, and that includes tree removal, landscaping replacement, and the sewer line repair itself. So that wasn't that bad. And because we had run the numbers correctly, and because we were putting in our budget capital improvement escrow, by the time we went to do that and we finished that work last year, it really didn't impact us in any negative way at all. I mean, there was no problem at all with that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm really happy with the way that it worked out, really. And I want to thank you because, it was really your guidance, as how much should you hold back a door per month, per year? You need to include that when you're running your numbers. And if you don't, you're going to get a real negative surprise in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Knowing how to run your numbers on any type of property that you would invest in is very important. And just having some of those rules of thumb about, well, what is maintenance going to cost you over the long period? What do you need to reserve for capital expenses? Those are all important things. And I think that because you change your perspective from going after the less expensive properties in the D areas that you could have afforded, and you'd have less capital at risk, but you'd also have more headache at risk too. I mean, there's just more problems with that type of property. Because you were able to say, well, let's pay more in a better area, you've been able to get an excellent property that's just had a phenomenal cash flow, phenomenal appreciation, and very low headache. Have you had any problems with this property that have really...
No, I mean, because nothing that our property managers haven't been able to handle, right? And I mean, that's what they're there for.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so you have a property manager who's taking care of it,
right?
And they're taking all the phone calls. They just send you the check every month,
right?
Huh?
I mean, 4 months in, we've never had an eviction. Nice. That's good, you know.
Yeah, I can't say that on hardly any of my properties. I've had plenty of evictions, so I think you hit a grand slam home run there. That's fantastic. Are you still paying on the note, or have you converted to commercial financing?
So we're actually in the process of converting to commercial financing right now, because I'd like to take some money out of the property. And so, I mean, as we speak, it's already gone through committee. It's been approved. And so we're going to be doing a 75% loan to value cash out refi, pending the appraisal, which we expect is going to come back based at about 440.
Wow. 440, you got that? And that's what happens. You can force appreciation on these commercial properties. So you get those rents up, you get the income up, expenses down, you force the appreciation on the property. So you bought it at 270, you're expecting it to value around 440. That's fantastic. Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason it won't value at that right now.
Sure.
I mean,
in today's market and climate, absolutely.
But of course, there is interest rate risk. And that's that move is one that not everyone would be comfortable with. And I've heard some of your other guests and their perspective on borrowing from the bank. It varies, right? And I guess everyone can respect sort of the alternate view of what's more or less risky. In this, I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing this in a property where I didn't really think the value was there and there was not significant potential upside in future rents. And in this case, there definitely is. I mean, there's no question. There's no question.
You're in a very stable area.
Absolutely.
That is seeing improvements all around. I mean, the neighborhood's. I know the neighborhood. It's changed quite a bit since you bought the property. Was that brewery there? 4 years ago?
The brewery was there. The brewery, the restaurants were there. But there, I mean, so compared to the portion of the town where the duplex is at, this is on the other side of the town. The duplex that's directly next door to this 8 unit, which I was attempting to purchase but failed, is being torn down and rebuilt as a duplex.
Okay.
And that's in the process of happening right now. And so anticipate that each sides of that duplex will be for sale, individually, or it'll be basically a small condo. But we anticipate that that's going to probably be in the 275. Each side of that will be $275,000. I was speaking with the broker on that particular property just 2 weeks ago, just to try and understand, what were the plans. So yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time to own property, but it's also very difficult to find properties there.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. So you bought that 4 years ago. Now we're gonna talk about your other property at a later date. But I take it you've probably been looking for more deals in Plymouth. I mean, what have you found?
Well, absolutely. And what I've found is that because of the conversations that I've had, I regularly go back and touch base with property owners and see if they've come to the point where they want to sell. And there are some other target properties that we're looking at, sort of long term, hopefully being able to make some type of purchase on. None of them will probably be as lucrative as this has been. I mean, unless there's another significant real estate downturn, which there will eventually be.
Right.
But for the foreseeable 3 to 5 year time frame, we're not going to, I think, see the same a repeat of 2007 for the real estate market in Plymouth, Michigan.
Right.
Right. So that's where it's at. So we continue to try to market directly to owners, and we write probably 20 letters a month right now. We've really kind of scaled it back a little bit.
Okay, so you're still actively
we're still
marketing.
actively doing that. I found as I've gotten away from Plymouth and away from the area where I know that a little bit of the response rate has fallen off. Especially in the past 12 months, I would say. So now I'm probably getting, 1 out of every 10 letters gets some level of a response.
Still pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, that's, it's, when I say response, I mean acknowledgement of the fact that it was received. So therefore, it was clearly not just ripped up and thrown in the trash.
Right.
I do occasionally get calls from several years ago now when I've written letters, and that can be a very confusing for a few couple of moments at the beginning of that conversation, because it's usually an older gentleman who's maybe ready now to sell, and he'll say, "This is Abraham, and you wanted to buy my property." And he's coming at me after sending a couple hundred of these letters out, that it's a little challenging to make the connection. And of course, because I strive to build this personal relationship, I'm not going to start out any conversation with, "I don't know who you are," because I've written so many of these things. That would not foster a good personal relationship.
Right.
So
what do you do? What do you say?
Well, I try and delay a little bit, and I ask them if I can give them a call right back, and then I go to my records and try and figure out who this person was, and it's pretty interesting, because I also, at your recommendation, I began following up on the roughly 70% of people who didn't contact me and just sending a second set of letters out. And some of those received responses, but those were much more negative. I mean, here's the thing: you've just got to be willing to put yourself out there if you're going to market in this way.
Right.
You have to be willing to accept the fact that someone is going to call you and maybe curse at you and tell you to never write them again. Because that does happen. People don't like being contacted in this way sometimes. And you just have to sort of get a little bit of a thick skin about it and understand that you're not going out to purchase a property that's being actively marketed. So you're going to get some resistance.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, let's stop there. I mean, it's really exciting that you've got this great 8 unit that was just a slam dunk. I mean, you did a fantastic job. So congratulations on that. Now you have another property, another apartment that was 12 units?
In Belleville?
Oh, no, 20 units.
20 units, yeah.
In Belleville. Would you be willing to come back next week and we'll talk about that one?
Absolutely.
All right, fantastic. Well, Ken, thanks so much for talking with us. I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Thanks a lot, Brian.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.